In the middle of the Montana wilderness, a man named Eli Turner, a 55-year-old former forest ranger with a weathered face and silver-streaked hair, thought he'd found peace in an abandoned ranger station. But on the very first night, his old golden retriever Max refused to sleep, growling softly toward the dark hallway. There hadn't been another human here for decades. Or so Eli believed. What Max discovered next would unravel a story buried deep in those woods, one that no one had dared to tell. The gravel crunched beneath the worn tires of Eli Turner's rusty pickup as it climbed the narrow forest road. After 20 years serving as a ranger across Montana's wilderness, Eli had retired early, hoping to leave behind the noise of cities and the memories that never stopped echoing. His weathered hands, marked by thin scars, gripped the steering wheel tightly as he approached the old ranger station, a place he had once visited decades ago when it was still full of life. Radio chatter, laughter, smoke from the chimney. Now, only silence greeted him. The building stood at the edge of tall pine trees, its wooden walls faded to grey, the windows covered with dust, and the once green door now hanging crooked on rusty hinges. Yet, something about it felt familiar, almost comforting, as if time itself had been waiting for his return. Beside him, Max, his 13-year-old golden retriever, sat quietly on the passenger seat, his golden fur glowing under the soft daylight filtering through the windshield. Max had been Eli's companion since the days when the ranger still wore his forest green uniform and patrolled endless miles of trails. The old dog's eyes, deep brown and full of loyalty, followed every movement his owner made. When Eli turned off the engine, Max lifted his head, sniffing the cool mountain air. The forest smelled of pine, damp moss, and distant rain. Eli stepped out, stretching his stiff back, and for a moment he simply listened. The whisper of leaves, the call of a raven, the faint rush of a nearby stream. It was peace, the kind that he had been chasing for years. Inside, the ranger station was frozen in time. Maps still hung on the wall, faded and curled at the edges. A dusty lantern sat on the counter. A single chair lay overturned near the fireplace. Eli ran his fingers across an old logbook, its pages brittle but still readable. He smiled faintly when he saw his own handwriting from 1991. Turner, patrol complete. The years washed over him like a wave of ghosts. He could almost hear the laughter of his old partner, Tom, and smell the coffee that used to burn in the pot every morning. But that was long ago. Now, there was only him and Max. "Well, buddy," Eli muttered softly, patting the dog's head, "looks like it's just you and me again." As daylight began to fade, Eli built a small fire in the hearth. He laid out a sleeping bag on the wooden floor, and Max curled up beside it. The glow of the fire danced across the log walls, making shadows move like quiet memories. For a while, everything was calm. But when Eli was half asleep, Max suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked. The dog's deep growl rumbled low in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Eli whispered, reaching for his flashlight. Max stood, tail stiff, staring toward the hallway that led to the back rooms. The sound came again, a faint creak, as if a floorboard had shifted under someone's weight. Eli froze. The fire crackled. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on an old door at the end of the corridor. It was slightly ajar. "Must be the wind," Eli said to himself, though his voice trembled. Max didn't relax. He took 2 cautious steps forward, growling deeper this time. Eli followed, his boots creaking on the wood floor. He reached the door and slowly pushed it open. The room beyond was empty, just a broken chair and a cracked window. The wind howled softly through the gap. Eli exhaled, almost laughing at his own nerves. But Max didn't move. He was staring at the corner of the room, fur bristled, eyes locked on something unseen. Eli followed the gaze, shining the light. Nothing but old shadows. Yet, a strange chill ran down his spine. That night, long after the fire had died out, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was right. Someone, or something, had been there, watching. Morning broke through the pine branches like gold threads weaving the forest awake. Eli Turner rose with the stiffness of a man who had slept on hardwood for too many years, his back aching, yet his spirit oddly lighter. Max was already sitting by the door, tail thumping softly, eyes fixed on the hallway that had disturbed him the night before. Eli rubbed the dog's head and whispered, "Still think someone's here, huh, buddy?" Outside, mist clung low to the earth, curling around the porch rails as if unwilling to leave. The world was hushed, but not silent. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a woodpecker hammered, and a brook murmured faintly downstream. Eli brewed coffee on a small camping stove, its scent mixing with pine and smoke. He stared at the mug, then at the open logbook on the table. Someone had written a line beneath his last note from decades ago. The ink was faint but fresh. "Still watching the forest?" The words chilled him. He hadn't written them. He'd found the logbook in a sealed drawer, untouched by dust. Eli frowned, tracing the letters with his finger. Max, restless, sniffed the floorboards and suddenly pawed at a corner near the fireplace, whining low. Eli crouched beside him. Beneath a layer of dust, a faint footprint was pressed into the wood, smaller than his own boot, sharp and recent. "Could be an old print," he muttered, but the words convinced no one, least of all Max. The dog pressed his nose against the doorframe, tail stiff, body tense. "All right," Eli said, grabbing his flashlight and his old ranger hat. "Let's take a walk." Outside, sunlight pierced through the fog, scattering diamonds of dew across the meadow. The ranger station stood like an old soldier at attention, weathered but proud. Eli and Max moved toward the storage shed a few yards away, its padlock hanging broken. Inside, rows of dusty tools leaned against the walls, except one. A freshly cleaned shovel, its metal glinting. Eli's pulse quickened. Someone had been here. He stepped back, scanning the forest edge. Max barked once, deep and certain. The echo bounced between the trees. In that instant, Eli caught a flicker, movement beyond the pines, a silhouette ducking low before vanishing into the green. "Hey!" he shouted, running forward, boots thudding, heart hammering in his chest. They chased the sound of snapping twigs up a slope until the noise dissolved into the wind. Nothing remained but the whisper of branches. Max stood alert, nose twitching, fur raised. Eli's breath came in fogged bursts as he looked around. There, half hidden under a fallen branch, lay an old tin canteen, polished recently, initials scratched on its side. T.W. Eli froze. Tom Wheeler, his old partner. Tom had vanished in this very forest 22 years ago. They'd searched for weeks before declaring him lost. Now this. Eli picked up the canteen slowly, turning it in the light. The metal was still warm from the sun, but its surface carried smudges of fresh skin oil. Someone had touched it, recently. He looked down at Max, whose gaze never wavered. "You knew," Eli whispered. "You knew all along." Back at the station, the air felt heavier. The forest, once peaceful, now seemed to listen. Max refused to leave Eli's side, his head turning toward every faint creak and sigh. As evening light tilted across the cabin floor, Eli sat at the table, canteen before him, logbook open, pencil trembling in his fingers. He wrote beneath the mysterious note, "If you're out there, I'm still here too." Then he set the pencil down and leaned back, the fire flickering shadows across his lined face. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked sharply, followed by the distant crunch of footsteps. Eli's hand moved to the flashlight again, but Max was already up, ears high, growling low and sure. Whatever haunted these woods hadn't left, and now it knew Eli had returned. The next morning came colder, sharper. Frost lined the truck's windshield, and the air bit at Eli Turner's lungs as he stepped outside to stretch. The forest seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Max was restless, pacing near the cabin door with his nose lifted to the wind. When Eli returned inside, he noticed something odd. The radio on the desk, an old shortwave relic covered in dust the day before, was faintly humming. Static whispered softly from the speaker, like someone breathing through the woods. Eli froze. The power generator wasn't even running. He leaned close and tapped the dial. A voice crackled through the static. Just a few broken words. Northridge. Help. Please. The voice was faint but unmistakably human. Max's ears perked up, his tail stiffening. You heard that too, huh? Eli muttered, twisting the knobs with trembling fingers. But the voice faded, leaving only static and silence. Eli sat back, staring at the device. The signal had come from the North Ridge, where Tom Wheeler's last patrol had been logged before he vanished 22 years ago. The thought hit Eli hard. His old friend had disappeared without a trace, and the canteen he found yesterday bore Tom's initials. Could someone have found it and used his name? Or worse, could it actually be him? By noon, Eli packed his gear, a lantern, rope, thermos, and his ranger's compass, scratched but still working. Max trotted beside him, excitement mixed with tension in every step. The forest north of the station was rough terrain, covered in ferns, moss, and silence. Sunlight filtered through narrow shafts between trunks, painting thin ribbons of gold on the forest floor. Eli followed an old trail barely visible beneath the leaves, the same one he and Tom had used years ago during their search and rescue shifts. Every step stirred echoes of memory, the laughter, the storms, the radio calls that never got answered. Halfway up the ridge, Max stopped suddenly. His fur bristled, tail stiff, body frozen like a statue. Eli raised his hand, scanning the trees. Then he saw it. Half hidden among ferns, a small metal antenna jutting from the ground, connected to a makeshift cable leading to a tarp-covered shape nearby. He crouched and pulled back the tarp. Beneath it was a weathered radio transmitter hooked up to a car battery and still warm. Someone's been here, Eli whispered. Max sniffed the equipment, growling low. There were fresh footprints in the mud, lighter than Eli's boots. They led deeper into the trees. The trail wound toward a rocky hollow at the base of the ridge. The light dimmed as branches closed overhead. Eli's heart pounded as he followed, Max moving ahead with quiet certainty. Then he heard it. A cough. Human. Eli raised his flashlight and stepped into the clearing. There, against the stone wall, sat a thin, bearded man wrapped in a ranger's coat. Torn, faded, but still bearing the name Patch. Wheeler. Eli froze. His chest tightened. The man's eyes blinked open weakly, clouded but alive. Tom? Eli's voice cracked. The man smiled faintly. Took you long enough, he whispered hoarsely before slumping forward. Max barked once, sharp and urgent, as if calling Eli back to action. The forest, silent for decades, suddenly felt alive again. The forest had never felt this still. Even the wind seemed afraid to breathe. Eli Turner knelt beside the frail body of his old friend, Tom Wheeler, whose thin frame trembled faintly beneath a torn ranger coat. The years had carved deep lines into Tom's face, his beard tangled and grey, his skin pale like frost. Yet when Eli pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, a faint pulse answered. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Max whined softly, his golden head resting near Tom's arm, as though recognizing an old scent. Eli swallowed hard, his throat tightening with disbelief. Easy, Tom. I've got you, he murmured, the words breaking somewhere between relief and grief. He scanned the hollow quickly, instincts snapping back like an old habit. Rusted cans sat beside a collapsed tent, an extinguished fire pit, and a lantern whose glass was blackened with soot. The ground told the rest of the story. Footprints circling the area, years of solitary steps. This wasn't a place someone stumbled into. It was a home, one built from survival and regret. You've been here all this time? Eli whispered under his breath. Tom's eyelids fluttered open, his cracked lips barely moving. Couldn't leave, he rasped, voice rough as gravel. Not after the fire. They didn't find it. His words faded into coughing, weak but urgent, as if he'd carried them for decades waiting to be heard. Eli leaned closer, but Tom's eyes rolled shut again, sinking into unconsciousness. "The fire?" Eli echoed, but no answer came, only the quiet rhythm of the forest. He worked quickly, gathering branches and rope, fashioning a stretcher with the ease of someone who'd once rescued hikers from cliffs and snowstorms. He slipped his old leather belt through the bindings for strength. "Hang in there, partner," he muttered, voice steady though his hands trembled. Max stood close, watching, tail still, eyes alert. Guardian and witness. Together, they lifted Tom, wrapping him gently in a torn blanket. The weight felt heavier than the man himself. It was the weight of 20 years of silence. The journey back to the ranger station was slow. The forest, usually comforting, now pressed close like an audience holding its breath. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of pine needles, the groan of shifting trees, the distant caw of a crow that made Eli's pulse quicken. Twice, Max stopped abruptly, ears forward, growling at something unseen beyond the tree line. Eli saw nothing but shadows and mist, and yet he could feel eyes watching. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Almost there." When they reached the clearing, Eli froze. A thin column of smoke curled into the sky from the direction of the hollow they had just left. Max barked once, sharp and tense. Eli's stomach turned cold. "They knew we found him," he muttered under his breath. Someone had torched the site to erase the past. Whoever had been living in those woods didn't want Tom, Wheeler's story told. Inside the ranger station, Eli laid Tom on the old cot near the fireplace. The room filled again with the smell of smoke, but this time it was the clean, human kind. He built a fire, warmed water, cleaned the wounds, and wrapped Tom's chest with a torn sheet. Max curled close to the cot, watching every move, refusing to sleep. The warmth returned to Tom's face slowly, his breathing evening out. Eli sat back, exhausted, his eyes falling on a strange lump sewn beneath the lining of Tom's coat. Carefully, he cut the thread. Out slid a small leather notebook, its cover worn, but intact. Inside, the pages were filled with strange marks, dates, and numbers. Coordinates scribbled in neat, deliberate handwriting. Eli turned to the last page, heart pounding. It read, "The fire wasn't an accident. Someone wanted it buried." Eli's fingers tightened on the book. His mind flashed back to that night 2 decades ago, the wildfire that had killed 2 men and forced dozens to evacuate. They'd called it an accident caused by lightning. But Tom must have known something different. As the flames from the hearth flickered against the walls, Eli looked at his old friend's face, lined, thin, yet finally at peace, and felt a surge of emotion he couldn't name. Relief, anger, guilt. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, growl low and steady. Outside the window, the trees swayed softly, and somewhere deep in the forest, a faint metallic clank echoed, like a door closing far away. Eli whispered to the sleeping man, "Whatever happened out there, we'll finish it together." The old cabin creaked in reply, as if the forest itself had heard him. The morning light crept through the cracked window panes, painting thin gold lines across the ranger station floor. The forest outside was eerily calm, but Eli Turner's mind was anything but. The small leather notebook lay open before him on the table, its pages crowded with tight handwriting and strange coordinates. Every date, every note was precise, until the very last line. The fire wasn't an accident. Those words had haunted him through the night. He hadn't slept. Neither had Max. The old dog still sat by the window, head resting on his paws, but his eyes never closed. From time to time, he'd lift his head and growl low at the woods beyond the clearing, as though something or someone was moving out there. Eli poured himself a cup of coffee, hands unsteady, eyes fixed on the notebook. Tom Wheeler had been missing for over 20 years, yet the coordinates in his notes were recent. The last entry was dated only a few months ago. "How the hell could you still be writing this?" Eli whispered, glancing toward the cot where Tom lay sleeping. His breathing was shallow but steady, color slowly returning to his face. Max rose and patted closer, nose brushing Tom's hand, tail wagging softly. "He's still with us, buddy," Eli murmured, scratching Max's ear. "Let's keep it that way." Eli traced one coordinate with his finger. It pointed to a spot north of the station, an area that had been sealed off after the wildfire 2 decades ago. He remembered the place well. A fuel cache had exploded there, burning half the forest and killing 2 rangers who'd gone missing before dawn. But if Tom's notes were right, that fire hadn't started from lightning. Someone had lit it deliberately, someone who didn't want others to see what was buried there. By midday, Tom stirred. His voice was weak, rasping. "You shouldn't have come back, Eli." Eli leaned forward. "You were out there all this time. Why? What happened that night?" Tom's cracked lips twitched into a bitter smile. "They lied, Eli, about the fire, about the shipments. We were just pawns." "Shipments?" Eli frowned. "What shipments?" Tom coughed, every word costing him breath. "There were barrels, toxic waste, illegal stuff. They buried them in the ridge. We found out. They set the fire to cover it up. I tried to warn them, but someone made sure I never left." Eli felt the blood drain from his face. He'd trusted the department, trusted the reports. "Who's they, Tom?" But Tom's strength was fading again. "You'll find them. Same ridge. They come back every few months," he whispered, before his voice faded into silence once more. Eli sat frozen for a long time, the fire crackling behind him. Outside, a gust of wind slammed the cabin door open, scattering a few loose papers from the notebook onto the floor. One of them skidded toward Max's paws. The dog sniffed it, then suddenly barked, deep and urgent. Eli followed his gaze through the window. Far off, at the edge of the forest, a truck was parked. Old, military green, half hidden behind the pines. Its engine wasn't running, but Eli could see the glint of binoculars from inside. Someone was watching them. Eli reached for his rifle instinctively, then stopped. Whoever was out there already knew he was awake. He closed the notebook, stuffed it into his jacket, and stepped to the window slowly. The truck door opened slightly, and then, without a sound, it backed away into the trees, vanishing down the dirt trail. Max barked again, louder this time, his fur bristling. "Yeah," Eli said softly. "I saw them too." He looked at the unconscious man on the cot, then at the dog. "They know he's alive," Eli said quietly, "and they're not going to let him talk." As the sun dropped low, long shadows stretched across the cabin floor. The woods outside glowed amber and still. Eli loaded his rifle, checked the lantern fuel, and stacked wood by the door. The station had once been a place of safety. Now, it felt like a fortress under siege. Max lay near the window, eyes fixed on the fading light. "It's not over yet, old boy," Eli whispered. "We've got one more fire to put out." The forest gave no answer, only the whisper of pine needles in the cold evening breeze. But deep among the trees, far from the cabin, the faint rumble of a truck engine started again, heading back toward the ridge. The storm came suddenly that night. Rain hammered the old ranger station roof, and the wind howled like ghosts caught between the trees. Eli Turner stood by the window, the rifle still across his lap, eyes fixed on the dark ridge beyond the forest. Somewhere out there, the truck he had seen earlier would be back. He could feel it. Max lay by the door, head low but eyes wide open, his ears twitching with every gust of wind. On the cot, Tom Wheeler stirred, whispering in his sleep, his voice tangled with fragments of the past. "The ridge. They'll come for it. Fire again." Eli walked over and placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "You're safe, Tom," he said softly. But he didn't believe it. He turned back to the notebook lying on the table, its last page torn and soaked from the leaking roof. The coordinates were still legible. North Ridge, near the burned clearing. Tom's last words echoed in his head. They buried the truth there. When dawn broke, Eli packed his bag with supplies: rope, flashlight, compass, and the notebook. He strapped his old sidearm to his belt. Max paced restlessly by the door, sensing what was coming. "We'll go see it, boy," Eli said. "Then we'll put this to rest, one way or another." The rain had eased to a thin drizzle by the time they reached the ridge. The forest was silent except for the drip of water from the pines. The earth smelled of ash and old secrets. When Eli and Max reached the clearing, the charred ground still bore the scars of the wildfire from 20 years ago. He stopped where the soil looked disturbed, like it had been dug and filled again. Using his shovel, Eli began to dig. Each strike of metal against earth echoed in the emptiness. Max stayed close, whining softly. Then the shovel hit something solid, a dull thud. Eli dropped to his knees and brushed the dirt away. Beneath the soil lay a half-buried metal barrel, rusted but sealed tight. Faded yellow warning symbols were still visible on its side. Radiation markings. The truth was right here. Tom had been telling the truth all along. Eli's breath came fast. "God, Tom, what did they make you keep quiet about?" he muttered. He pulled his phone from his pocket, snapping a photo, but before he could send it, Max barked furiously. Once, twice, 3 times. Eli spun around. From behind the ridge, a truck engine roared to life. Men in dark jackets appeared between the trees. 2, maybe 3. They were armed. "Back up, boy," Eli shouted, drawing his rifle. The figures stopped, one of them raising a flashlight. "You shouldn't have come here, Turner," a voice yelled across the rain-soaked clearing. It was deep, familiar. The voice of their old superior, Chief Dalton, the man who had declared Tom dead 20 years ago. "You know what's buried here. Walk away and you'll live." Eli's jaw tightened. "You buried people, not just waste." Dalton's voice grew colder. "So did he said, pointing toward the direction of the cabin. "You think your friend's innocent?" Eli hesitated for a heartbeat, but Max moved first, stepping forward, growling, standing between Eli and the men. That old dog looked like he'd seen everything the forest had to hide, and he wasn't afraid of any of it. "Good boy," Eli whispered. Then came the shot. A single echo cracking through the pines. The bullet hit the ground near Eli's boot. He fired back, warning, not killing. The sound rolled like thunder. One of the men fled. Another stumbled back. Dalton disappeared into the trees. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Eli knelt beside Max, who stood shaking but unharmed, ears flattened. "We're done here, boy," he said quietly. "They can hide the truth, but not forever." He turned toward the sunrise breaking through the fog, the first light in days. Hours later, back at the cabin, Tom was awake. His voice was barely a whisper. "Did you find it?" Eli nodded slowly. "I did, and I'll make sure they can't burn it away again." Tom smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Then I can rest." That night, as the storm cleared, Eli sat outside the ranger station, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Max lay beside him, breathing slow and steady, tail thumping once every few seconds. The forest shimmered under the dawn light, peaceful again. Somewhere deep in the trees, a new day began, and for the first time in 20 years, the truth no longer slept beneath the pines. Eli whispered, "We kept the watch, old boy." Max lifted his head, looked at him with those calm brown eyes, and the forest seemed to breathe again.